Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that gives you a competitive advantage, an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world, looking for patterns and early warning signs, and asking how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's June 1st, 2026. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Eric. June 1st. Craziness, right?
Yeah, and welcome back.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone noticed that we took the week off.
We did. We skipped recording on Memorial Day, spent some time with family and some other competing priorities, but happy to be back.
Yeah, really happy to be back. And neatly enough, the world has provided for us, so we probably have a few things to talk about. I had a great weekend. I went to the Intelligence and National Security Alliance's 41st annual Oliver Baker Award, and it's probably the big award of the national security community, and it recognizes individuals who have demonstrated sustained excellence within those communities. And the who's who of who's received this award since, I think, 1985 maybe was the first one. It's just unbelievable. It includes Doctors Edwin Land, and Edwin Land is really the father of photo reconnaissance and the land of the Polaroid land camera. Bob Herman, huge in nuclear science, Bud Whelan in space advance, but also people like Jim Schlesinger and Bill Perry and Brent Scowcroft have been recipients. UT's own Bobby Inman, Judge William Webster, and Kara Christie of NSA fame, and Stephanie O'Sullivan, all have received this award. So it's kind of a big deal. And this year's awardee was my friend and colleague, Chris Inglis, who's very typical of an awardee. He started his journey in national service in the Air Force, and then he was the deputy director of the National Security Agency and was the nation's first national cyber director. He also teaches cyber at the Naval Academy. Maybe his name isn't as well known yet as all those other people I mentioned, but totally worthy. And sure, his brilliance, but more his humility and his integrity. But what struck me and what I really wanted to comment on, and it's a little bit relevant to what we're going to talk about today, is he focused on serving his country in any way asked. And he kind of mentioned that's what the best have always done, is to serve as necessary, not to serve as they prefer. So I came away thinking about the difference between service and loyalty as we go into this episode. But congratulations, Chris, so worthy. And plus, I've had a sporty year, not being able to travel or see as many people as I want. And boy, was it fun to be around just 500-600 of, turns out to be some of my closest and most longtime friends and colleagues. So it was a great night.
Nice, very cool. Yeah, that's quite the list of previous recipients. Sue, I will say you had a significant omission. Could you remind us who the 2021 recipient of the Oliver Baker Award was?
In my remarks, when I was honored to receive it, what I said is what I said was one of these things is not like the others. But I think what is probably true is I was just as proud to represent my community as every one of those others people were. So thanks, Eric.
Nice. Very cool. Well, what are we talking about today?
I was thinking about this and the interim wars, and I came across a quote from Douglas MacArthur that kind of stopped me in my tracks. He warned against the idea that public servants should owe primary allegiance or loyalty to those who temporarily exercise the authority of the executive branch of government rather than to the country, its citizens, and its constitution. Now, before anyone assumes this is about one administration or one party, it isn't. It's about a principle, because every democracy eventually faces the same question. What's the purpose of public service? Is it loyalty to a person or a party, or is it commitment to a mission or an institution and ultimately the citizens those institutions serve? The reason I bring this up is we're having a lot of national conversations about issues, from the war in Iran to a proposed executive order on federal employees being required to sign a non-disclosure agreement beyond those that cover classified information, and the qualifications of those people who represent states on the national level. So I thought we could today unpack those issues and try and offer some of our better questions that would help reveal what's really at stake with each of these. And Eric, you and I might offer our opinions on each of these issues, kind of how we see it. But I'm hoping that what we mostly do is to offer a framework for understanding and hopefully coming together on what's actually important in each of these pretty disparate, but each big issues that we're addressing. So, what do you think?
Yeah, and we will get back to the framework. And I think next week we're probably going to try to talk about the budget
Yep,
and the lens of what we're going through. But between all the things that are happening and us not being here last week, we wanted to jump in and top off on some of these issues.
perfect.
All right. So we'll start with Iran. And it's been over 3 months since the start of the U.S. military operations against Iran. And depending on who you listen to in Washington, Iran is either on its knees or stronger than when we started. Reports indicate a tentative agreement extending a ceasefire by 60 days, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and beginning talks on Iran's nuclear program. President Trump reportedly met with advisors Friday and sent back the text of the agreement with changes. It reportedly has set preconditions, including Iran delivering 400 kilograms of enriched uranium, maintaining only one operational nuclear reactor. But he's also trying to tie the peace deal to an expansion of the Abraham Accords, pushing Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Jordan to normalize relations with Israel simultaneously. That seems like a lot, but the Abraham Accords is a success you've highlighted previously from the first Trump administration. So is that visionary diplomacy, or is it overloading a negotiation that needs to be simpler to succeed?
Yeah, Eric, I don't know that I understand where we are right now in negotiations. Actually, this morning before we jumped online, I think I heard that Iran has sent comments back on what President Trump sent out to them.
Okay. And there's strikes, right? Like we hit some of their stuff. They're sending drones. Ceasefire.
I know. Is it just me, or is there something that just is cognitive dissonance and both people are striking, but the ceasefire is mostly holding?
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope we get an agreement. I'll talk about that in a second. But I do know that we have lost trust and standing globally. And even if we still have power, we can use, I think it's a reach that we can dictate normalizing relationships in the Middle East between old countries. And again, I think in the United States, because we're so young and we formed this nation by choice in a new land in a new way, we had this concept of a nation that is new and fresh and still in our control and, our aspirations move along. Man, these countries and cultures are so old that to think that we can dictate who normalizes relationship with who, even if we might frame how they act toward each other, I think is as much of a reach as telling Iran that it can't aspire to have a nuclear weapon. We can set some limits on that like we have previously. But to your question, I think it's a reach to dictate how people feel about each other, even as it would be a good thing if they could. Kind of my overall view of what's going on, I still am cautiously supportive of negotiations. I think the objectives that we've laid out are correct. Prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, avoid another, not just this Middle East war, because, to say to avoid a Middle East war, we're kind of in one, but one that extends into the whole region and then just presses out globally, and to preserve regional stability. I think those are okay objectives, and diplomacy isn't weakness. President Trump famously says, I want to be able to talk with everybody. I think that's right. Every national security strategy includes diplomacy. But the only thing I'd say is that my support comes with a caveat, and that is Iran's incentives haven't fundamentally changed. Verification matters more than promises. So even if we get an agreement,
Right.
that's going to be an agreement in principle, right? And my concern isn't talking, my concern is what we trade away. And once we surrender leverage, it's difficult to recover. So, my simplistic way of saying it, I support negotiations. I just don't support wishful thinking. And I just don't think we have seen enough, know enough, understand enough, nor see the process by which next happens. The world is worse off for this conflict the way it's been prosecuted, but I do hope we can come to some agreement because the costs of it are mounting globally and in the United States, and it's not just gas prices. We're spending a lot of money on war fighting right now and on weaponry and on deployments, and we're putting a lot of strain on the women and men who decide to, are actually out there prosecuting this. So, I support negotiations, but we really do need to balance it with some reality.
Absolutely. In response to the claims that Iran is stronger than they were before the war, the quote came from Senator Coons, a Democrat from Delaware over the weekend, and said that, quote, Iran is stronger than they were 90 days ago because they've used cheap drones to close the Strait of Hormuz, attack regional infrastructure, hit embassies and bases. I kind of push back on that a
Yeah.
little bit. I don't know that you can say they're stronger than they were 90 days ago. They may be more resilient in some areas, right? This could have emboldened the people, the
Yeah.
new supreme leader, but also they have not been as decimated as maybe initial reports had said, with some of their missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz specifically being operational. But I wonder if you had any comments pushing back on or agreeing with Senator Coons.
Oof. Well, I think you said it really well. I don't know that I think they're stronger. They've been decimated and harmed, and we've inflicted incredible costs. I think we have emboldened them in some ways. And I think the way the war has been prosecuted and the way that we've kind of been shifting our sands has one, the Strait of Hormuz has shown them that they have pretty significant economic leverage. I mean,
Right.
how many days is this now that the strait has been closed? I mean, those costs are piling up. We may not be reporting them, but they are adding up. And I think the market is behaving as though they think it's going to be temporary. I don't know where the data is to suggest that's true. But the other thing that I think when I talk about maybe not stronger, but at the moment, we decided to initiate this war with Iran. It was, in fact, true that Iran was in their own perilous position, right? And their people were rising up against them. They had been weakened by the things that had been happening. They're just really discordant. I think it is a reasonable point. We have codified the regime's control over the populace, and we have lessened the ability of the Iranian people by the way we have decimated the infrastructure to actually effect any change on their own. So I don't know that we've made them stronger. I think we have created a worse environment for meaningful change of the relationship we have with them. And because we have not proven to be particularly trustworthy, even if we are able to get an agreement on paper that sounds like the best we can get, do you believe we've won hearts and minds?
On this program before, we've talked about the record inflation in Iran. We talked
Right.
about the water crisis, right? And all those things would point to it being a tinderbox for a revolution. But then we initiated this plant, well, this dynamic environment without a representative in on the offing.
What we have left ourselves with was we might have had an opportunity to gain some commitment for change. I think we are effectively coercing them if we are successful in negotiation. That tends not to persist.
And they recognize us for what we are, as a transactional ally now, right? They've seen that in the
Yeah.
last couple
Right.
years with Ukraine. They've seen it in our withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so why would you put your neck out there if you're someone protesting in Iran?
I think the reason why we had these conversations is don't conflate those two things. Negotiations are good. The issues were real. Iran was malign. The regime was murderous. Have we made it better? And are what we now doing is disagreeing over what we should advance more than disagreeing over whose side we're on in our own country.
Sure. The second and third order effects, though, you mentioned some of that with the price and commodities, is the oil uncertainty coming down the road. NPR's Camilla Domonoski framed this as Schrodinger's oil crisis, reference to Schrodinger cat
Yep.
that's both alive and dead at the same time until you open the box.
Yeah.
The market can't tell if this is short disruption or the worst oil shock since the 1970s, so prices have been volatile, up to $110 a barrel, swinging $35 a barrel within a day, but not as high as a prolonged closure would warrant. Gas is averaging $4.34, up from $3.15 a year ago. And if the oil market is essentially betting this ends quickly because recent geopolitical crises have. Is that the right lesson, or is this fundamentally different because the Strait of Hormuz has never actually been closed for this long, around 95 days?
Yeah, I think this is different. And I think what you have is collusion amongst leaders in the market to minimize the effect, because if it is the latter, we are heading for a real problem economically that extends far beyond simply oil prices, but to supply chains writ large. So I think, I mean, I'm not sure that collusion was the perfect term, but but I do think, to my point earlier about, I think we have a bunch of wishful thinking go on, and the people that are the power players are trying to act in a way that is optimistic so that things maintain stability. The problem is, I don't see any real evidence to suggest that this is going to get better in the short haul. We've seen it, Eric. We've seen the manipulation of the market by the timing of statements from the White House
Mm-hmm.
on whether we are close to a deal or not. But none of that closeness is supported by data. My God, we we have Israel launching an incredible offensive against Lebanon, and no one's really paying attention. And we know that that is 100% against the ceasefire agreement, but it's like everyone's trying to act in a manner that damps out the global economic crisis that I think this could be if it continues to drag out without transparency and without resolution. And even if we get resolution, back to the verification process. I mean, a letter is one thing, behaviors are another.
If it walks like a duck, Sue, and it talks like a duck, it's probably collusion.
But again, I think they're doing it in a weird sort of way to maintain stability, hoping that it can't be as bad as it feels underneath the surface, despite the statements
Sure.
that are being made. And again, my worry, and this is a strategic worry more than it's even a tactical worry about Iran, is that the US's power that was disproportionately in our stability and our trustworthiness has undoubtedly been eroded. Oh, we may look more powerful. We may be fearsome. We may be able to get some people to say, oh my gosh, they could bomb us into oblivion. But that's a short-term thing. I worry most about who have we become in terms of that stabilizing force, and I think we're trying to act like we're still that, and I'm not convinced that we are.
Yep. Well, speaking of dampening some reality,
Yeah.
the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, has drafted a government-wide non-disclosure agreement, NDA, that would apply to every federal employee, new hires, and current staff. The NDA covers internal agency operations, personnel matters, procurement, and any pre-decisional or deliberative material. This isn't classified information where protections already exist. This covers unclassified internal operations, personnel matters, procurement, essentially any information that's, quote, not currently publicly available. That's nearly everything a federal employee knows about how their agency works. So in the private sector, NDAs serve a pretty specific and well-understood purpose: protecting competitive advantage. A tech company's employees signed NDAs to protect trade secrets, proprietary algorithms, project roadmaps, information that, if a competitor got a hold of, would undermine the company's market position. The NDA exists because the company has a legitimate proprietary interest and the employee understands the deal. You get access to valuable information, and in exchange, you agree not to share it with competitors. Government is fundamentally different. The customer, in this case, of the government isn't a shareholder or stakeholder, it's the public. The information federal government employees handle isn't proprietary to the administration. It belongs to the taxpayers who fund the operations. So, Sue, in this case, what problem is this NDA actually trying to solve?
Yeah, I think the administration says leaks, and I'm on record saying I have leaks, but That's one thing to say, but does that problem actually exist? Because we already have extensive protections for classified information and sources and methods and military plans and intelligence reporting and sensitive national security administration, which is the government's version of what companies are trying to protect. And we have those. Now, you can argue whether they are being enforced as well as they might. Enforce them. And if you say, well, it's really hard for us to tell the source of where they're revealing that information is, then figure out a way to solve it. So I think it is something different entirely than trying to protect against leaks. And I'll give you my 6 point I'll give you my 6 points of why I think this way. 6. And I hope everyone's going, 6? Wow,
Six,
weird.
that's double.
That's twice as many as 3, so we must really care about this. So first things first, the private sector analogy just doesn't hold. They protect trade secrets and sensitive interests. The federal government secrets are largely the public's business. Government is different. The government belongs to the people, not belongs to the government. So the analogy of private sector NDAs actually inverts the accountability relationship entirely, right? Because in the government is accountable to the people, and thus transparency is important, which is different than the other. So that's one. Two, I've already said this, classified information is already protected. I have an NDA that lasts my whole lifetime. Right? There is nothing that absolves me other than official declassification of
Right.
not revealing any of the information that is protected. I'm bound by that. And listen, I talk a lot about national security issues. Never once, not once, have I revealed the information that the government protects with that. And again, I think that is by design. Classified information isn't to protect against embarrassment. It isn't to protect against wrongdoing, it's to protect something very specifically, and I think that does it, and again, to the extent that it isn't effective and that's 2 different versions of it isn't effective. One, we ought to prosecute leaks because they're bad, and the second is if too much is classified, we ought to come up with some new processes. Point 3, government processes must be transparent by design. Democratic legitimacy depends on the public knowing how decisions are made, not just what those decisions are. And shielding pre-decisional and deliberative material from disclosure fundamentally undermines the principle and concentrates power in the executive. Sisu's excursion on Douglas MacArthur. I think the real target of this is the press, not security. OPM's notice specifically cited examples of news outlets reporting on drafts of regulations and interagency discussions as a justification. Using an NDA law to dry up journalism about government policy is a First Amendment problem dressed in human resources clothing. So I you asked what problem is really being solved. I think the administration is really looking at that other because everything else just doesn't make much sense. And I think we may talk about this. I think the compliance mechanism is coercive. The largest federal workers union believes that the administration will push agencies to require employees to sign the NDA and then fire those who refuse, effectively using employment as leverage to silence the civil service, independent of actual legal authority. So, just in sum, government is different from a private corporation, and government belongs to the American people. Transparency isn't a bug. It's a feature, and the presumption in a democracy should be openness.
Yeah, and I think there's not government agencies are necessarily competing against each other, right? If
Right.
the EPA
No.
comes up with something really clever, we don't want them to withhold that and not
Right.
share that information to the Department of
Right.
Agriculture.
Got it.
Even though they're separate entities, right, within the executive, they could still resource share and share best practices and things like that. So this whole point of proprietary and competitive advantage in the
Yeah.
agency is false.
Yeah. Listen, the challenge for every leader, any leader, is to create enough loyalty that people stay with the mission, right? They don't go just rogue saying, I know better what this institution is supposed to do, and enough trust that they still tell you the truth, right? That's the challenge. It's why loyalty isn't my favorite thing, but I do understand the premise, which says I kind of have to keep everyone aligned, right? Whether that's a society or an institution. But I have to have enough trust and I have to instill enough trust that they're not just staying with the party line and not telling you the truth. And what's interesting about it is if you did something like this, the weirdest thing that happens is you dampen the discourse inside the institution, right? It's not just that you're not revealing it to the American people writ large, you're dampening it inside the institution where you need the most discourse.
Yeah, well, OPM says that whistleblower protections remain intact, right? But the critics, some of which you mentioned, the AFGE, whistleblower aid, they argue the chilling effect is the point.
Yeah.
Even if whistleblowing is technically legal, a signed NDA makes people afraid to talk both internally and to inspectors general, Congress, journalists, etc. The distinction between legal right and practical deterrence matters. The administration says this doesn't affect whistleblower protections, but from your experience, does the existence of a signed NDA change how people behave, regardless of what the law technically says?
100%. 100%. I don't spend a lot of time inside my community anymore, but I'm around enough to hear that it's already problematic. Even without an NDA, this pressure to toe a party line, to not dissent is huge. If now you put it in writing, people are going to start calculating whether honesty is worth the personal risk. And that's bad for democracy. It's also bad for institutional performance. I would just say the president has floated it as an executive order. This is one that doesn't have tethering to any other real policy agenda. And because of that, it's not about, how you feel about borders. It isn't about how you feel about fraud, waste, and abuse. This one really boils down to whether you're creating an environment that you can have open discourse about things that are important to the American people and whether you're keeping institutional strength by allowing disagreement. So this is one that I think should be fought at every level because the impact on our system and our institution are so profound without any particular evidence that it would solve the problem of not sharing really sensitive information, which only should be kept in narrow bins. But this one for America, since the institutions serve the people, to put a chilling effect on our institutions is just problematic in a brand new way and really needs to be disagreed with so that it never comes to pass. But go ahead and protect classified information harder and punish those people who don't live up to their agreements on that. But we've already got that.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Well, speaking about loyalty to the organization or to the institution, let's get a quick update on some of the primaries around the country and some candidates. So in Texas, Ken Paxton beat Senator John Cornyn by 24 points in the Texas Republican Senate runoff. That's a fourth-term senator, first elected in 2002, former majority whip, blown out by a state AG who has been impeached by his own party state house 2 years ago and has a number of personal and legal challenges. I'm going to thread the needle there. And Cornyn isn't alone. Senator Bill Cassidy lost in Louisiana. Senator Thomas Massie got crushed in Kentucky. And the common thread in all three of these cases, President Trump endorsed against all three, and the voters followed. Cornyn voted with Trump overwhelmingly, stood with him at the border, etc., but wasn't seen as sufficiently loyal. Cornyn was an effective whip. Cassidy chaired the Help Committee, and Massie has been very vocal on the Epstein file releases. So you talked a lot about the importance of institutions over personalities. What does it mean for national security when the Senate's most experienced members are now lame ducks and are being replaced not because of policy disagreements, but because of insufficient loyalty?
Yeah, this is an absolutely I don't have enough adjectives to describe how bad this is. This is an abysmal trend. I've talked about it in terms of as we were losing the professional cadre, whether it's first through Doge or all the reasons that people have been let go from the government, or every 4 years when we elect somebody new, we lose half of the experience and the expertise that is serving in that professional cadre. This is another evidence of it. It's awful. We are throwing away experience. Now, the American people can vote in around whoever they want to, but if we've gone to the simplicity of loyalty, you're either for me or against me. Ugh. So the question is, can people disagree and still be loyal? I am a resounding yes on this. Healthy institutions do need loyalty, but they also need truth. You and I have talked about friction. We've talked about diversity and difference. We've talked about disagreement. All of those things are design features of our system of government, whether that is the three branches we have or the two parties we have or just the discourse that we engage in as a population. All those things are features of our system of government, and the importance of maintaining trust in that system in the end. We have to maintain that trust that we all have the same mission and the same end state in mind, even if we disagree with the specific actions. I don't know about you, Eric, but the fact that we now have straight party line votes in Congress is insanity. One, they are representatives of this beautifully diverse nation. I mean, that's why we have an electoral college. That's why we do our voting be state-centric. We love the diversity of this nation. To then say when we come into the Congress, we're going to vote, and then if you even express disagreement, not even won the vote or persuaded a different policy, you're going to be primaried out. And as much as I might want to say they've got to stand up and keep doing the right thing, I don't know how that worked out for Liz Cheney or Bill Cassidy or John Carter. These are all people that were loyal to the policies in general of their party, just as on the Democratic side, that is typically true. But we used to have more discourse and disagreement. And so this effect, I think, is a horrible trend. Ultimately, it's going to come down to the people and whether they listen to it and whether they believe in it or not. Again, I will never tell the American people who to support, but I do hope we're helping them pick their heads up and see what's really going on and that it's their interests that are being disadvantaged rather than anything else. So maybe what we do is we take the Texas Senate race and we apply some of our better questions to it and see if we can inspire people who will now have a vote, right? No matter what the president wants, the people of the state of Texas have a choice to make. So maybe we talk about not party loyalty, but rather what they should be asking of these two men who are very different. I mean, they're both populists in a way, but very different populists. What about Paxton and Tallarico? What
Yep.
questions should we ask them? What do you think?
Yeah, I like it. And I don't want to over rotate on this too far, right? This was a single party primary, but 3 is a trend. And it's also interesting, not to get too much into domestic politics, but much of the MAGA movement was reported to have been disenfranchised by the handling of some of the Epstein files. However, it would appear that much of that movement came out in support of President Trump's recommended candidates in each of these 3 locations. Certainly a signal as we head towards
Right.
November and those bigger elections. So, yeah, what questions we got?
Okay, so Paxton versus Tallarico. I think the first question or the first point that citizens ought to say is, what job are we hiring for in this election? We're hiring for U.S. Senator, not an activist, not a celebrity, not a culture warrior, not a social media personality, a senator, someone who is carrying a state's values and views into the most important decision-making body we have in the country. That's big. And so I think there are going to be a lot of discussions around character. I always think character matters, but I don't think that's the question that's being asked. This is who is going to be the better United States senator to carry this state's views forward into the nation's decision-making body. And are they going to be strong, not just in this administration, but going forward in terms of putting balance and keeping the tension that makes the 3 branches of the government work? So first thing first is remember what we're hiring for. The second question after that is, so what evidence demonstrates readiness to do that? And I think actually both these candidates, I don't know about you, have some things that they need to prove.
Yeah.
So Paxton, has held essentially an executive branch position here in the state of Texas. Tallarico has been a state senator, but a state senator is different from a U.S. senator. So we ought to be asking, well, what responsibilities have they carried? And what decisions have they made? I don't know. Anything else on that front?
No, I think that's a great point. Tallarico's only been in office for 3 terms, I think.
Now there is something he has because he defeated Jasmine Crockett, which I think was a surprise, right? She has been a warrior on that front. So there is something he has, but press on that. What responsibilities do they could carry? What decisions? What readiness do they have? Because our system requires this duality of independence and commitment to something bigger, and ask questions about that. So I'd ask, what problems do they think matter the most? I'd start with Texas. Is it water? Is it energy? Is it education? Is it growth? Is it border management? Is it workforce? I have my views of what's important, but ask them that. Listen to the answers and whether they fit your priorities. Are they going to represent Texas and our needs? Now, small caveat, I'm gonna make you ask more questions. My small caveat on that is because currently we seem to be in a retributive and reward place where if you're a blue state, you are disadvantaged. If you're a red state, you're advantaged. But again, this moment is not the only moment that these people will serve. Yes, I recognize that being on the side of the executive branch potentially leads to more rewards, particularly in this administration. But that's not exactly what you're trying to do over the long haul. So let's see if we can't send people that are both committed to serving the nation and committed to representing what is the interest of this incredibly powerful, important state.
Yeah, and then to play off of some of those important issues, what are the biggest national problems that
Right.
matter the most to you, right? And that's domestic issues like the national debt, AI and AI infrastructure, but also international because doesn't the Senate ratify treaties and alliances? And so what is your position on China?
I love it. Exactly. War powers is fundamentally where do we spend our resources, right? Is that important enough? And do you see it? And especially, I love that you brought up the national security issues because this is a state whose populace does disproportionately contribute to national security. Its sons and daughters commit. Don't we want to have a view on those things? I think my last question would be my favorite. How do they make decisions? Because it's easy for them to add up things that turn into an equation, but decisions are different. I'd ask them, tell me a time when facts have changed your mind, because leadership is fundamentally decision making under uncertainty. So if I had the chance to be in a debate or have a town hall with one of these two who want to represent you, I'd say, talk to me at a time that you changed your mind or you stood your ground and how you do that. Because what we're hiring is not certainty. It isn't. Certainty is so easy. What you're hiring is judgment, and we ought to ask questions. And again, these two, this is a big jump for both of them. We ought to be looking at this Texas primary as a microcosm for others to say, we're not hiring mascots. We're hiring a United States senator. And the most revealing thing that any candidate can show isn't what they believe. It's what they do when reality disagrees with them. And that ties back to all three segments that we've had today. And that is, I love negotiation. I don't like wishful thinking. I love protection of secrets. I don't like muzzling disagreement. And if you're a state senator, how do you represent interests? But then how do you exercise that judgment when a new question comes to the fore? And it all depends on you doing your job because it ultimately does come down to people who have to carry our nation's intention in every action that they conduct. Ask questions about that and we'll be in good stead.
Nice. Can I add one question? What will you do if you lose? Harkening back from a previous episode.
Love that. We haven't talked much about this. My dismay in the continued purveyance of that the 2020 election was illegitimate is just so destructive. We might be able to get past it because it's in the rearview mirror, but not if that becomes a standard by which every person who doesn't win conducts themselves.
What are you watching?
Change the subject from today. What I'm watching this week comes from a conversation with my friend, I'm lucky enough to say, an Austin surgeon, Dr. Elizabeth Potter, who was on Capitol Hill a week ago with not only Noah Wiley of the great show The Pit, but she was there with like the whole ecosystem of healthcare workers advocating for healthcare reform. And what was cool is it wasn't just physicians, because sometimes if it's just one discipline who's advocating for change, you can say maybe they're basically just advancing their profession. But the meeting on Capitol Hill talking about healthcare reform included nurses and therapists and technicians and other healthcare professionals, the people that actually make care happening. And when an entire workforce raises concerns, it's a signal, to use our word, that something deeper is happening. And I and you have both worked in complex systems, and I've learned that you need to pay attention when the people closest to the work start telling you that the system is getting in the way of mission. Actually, that's what the American people told us with the last few elections, is that the government wasn't serving them as well, that the process of government wasn't delivering on its
Oh,
promise. In this case, it's the entire ecosystem of people whose shared purpose is patient care, who are telling us the system is blinking red, that the problem isn't just the cost of the care that creates disparities, but the care itself is being undermined. So it's not a particular healthcare bill I'm watching, but whether what we're doing about this systems issue that you and I have talked about before is so fundamental to whether this nation will be able to rally to meet any of the moments we have, because we can't do that if our people aren't well-informed, well-educated, and healthy. And so I think this is a really big one, and I was really proud that it was an Austin surgeon that was kind of has been and then took this to the Congress and seemed to have some really great conversations about it. So let's watch this one because I think it's important.
nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's real. How about you? What are you watching?
For me, in the past couple weeks, the U.S. awarded a quantum computing contract, $2 billion worth, and taken some equity stakes in a few different quantum computing companies. So we had our episode on quantum a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
but U.S. is picking some winners and investing, and similar to the model with Intel,
Yeah.
taking some equity stakes to see some of the return on investment. So that is a model that looks to be picking up steam, and they're going to continue to use it to get a return for the American people, I guess.
Yeah, but, I was thinking about it, reading the same article. I didn't have the clarity that you just did, but I'll add my point in, is it used to be that we knew a technology was important because it started with the government investment, whether that was computing or nuclear energy or a lot of things, and so we knew it was important because the government was kinda leading the way, and then over the last 20 years, I would say the private sector has led the way, which is great, and it's just allowed for this incredible growth in new technologies, but we've kind of lost our ability to add any accountability in or to make sure that our national interests are being served by this thing that we're disproportionately creating. So I'm wondering, because I worry about the US government taking equity stakes and picking winners and losers, but I think there's maybe an upside to this that says, yeah, maybe this is a new age way for the government to have influence over ensuring that we have the things we really need as a nation. It's going to be that balance between keeping our own competitiveness that has driven the advance, but also being willing to say, but the government does have an opinion about what we're going to need. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch. I love your choice of that.
Yeah, on the one hand, the private sector is assuming more of the risk in the development of that technology. But at least in this example, the government has been de-risking some of that with
Right,
investments all along the way with
right,
many of these quantum computing firms. So
right.
just because we're adding $2 billion now and taking an equity stake, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a firm that didn't have
Yeah.
some form of government move along from inception.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just remember, companies out there in the cyber world, there is a quantum encryption day coming. Make sure you're ready for it. Look at NIST standards and don't ignore this as you're doing all your other revisions to your cybersecurity and information infrastructure. That was a paid political announcement from your friend, Sue Gordon.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're watching and how we see it. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
We're always glad to hear that you've joined us. We also would love to hear what you think of our direction, focus, and insights, because we really are here for you, and it's trying to add our perspective to your decision-making that we're offering. So join us next week and each week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sake, be kind to one another because it makes all the difference.